At 9 years old, Marshall Mathers was beaten with a metal pipe on the streets of Detroit until he slipped into a near coma. His father vanished before he could walk. His mother was lost to pills. He failed ninth grade 3 times, dropped out, and scrubbed dishes for minimum wage while raising a newborn daughter. Everyone told him a white kid from a trailer park had no place in rap. That kid turned every rejection into a $250 million empire. But how he went from washing dishes in Detroit to the top of hip-hop starts long before the music ever did. Marshall Bruce Mathers III was born on October 17, 1972, in St. Joseph, Missouri. His name appeared on the birth certificate beside 2 parents, but that sense of family barely lasted through his first year. By the time he could walk, his father had disappeared. There was no forwarding address, no child support, only a line in a Wayne County court file labeling him unlocatable. Debbie Mathers, left alone with her infant son, packed what little she had and moved to Detroit before Marshall's first birthday. Their first address, a battered rental on East Miller Street, was just one stop in a long series of temporary homes. Even as a toddler, Marshall's world was marked by instability. Debbie's struggle with prescription pills started early. Hospital records from 1975 mention her by name, and by the mid-1970s, local police reports listed her in connection with a Detroit hospital visit for controlled substance issues. The family's moves became a blur, from apartments to trailer parks, each one more run down than the last. Property records show a lease for a mobile home on Marble Street, signed in October 1976. The rent was barely scraping $85 a month. Each address change meant new faces, new risks, and a growing sense that nothing was permanent. Custody dockets from the early 1970s and the late 70s paint a picture of legal chaos. Court orders granted Debbie full custody, but the father's absence was so complete that attempts to track him down for child support failed before Marshall even started school. The legal documents are blunt: absent parent, no response, support unfulfilled. Inside the home, the emotional vacuum was just as real. Debbie's addiction deepened, and her focus shifted from her son to her next prescription. There were no family traditions, no steady routines, only the constant shuffle from one address to the next, and the looming threat of eviction or worse. For Marshall, security was never an option. From the very beginning, the walls around him were already crumbling. That sense of being unwanted, of being left behind, would follow him through every setback, every humiliation, and every fight for a place in the world. Detroit's East Side in the early 1980s was a place where the numbers did not lie. In the trailer parks where Marshall Mathers grew up, census records show over 95% of families were black. The handful of white kids stood out, and Marshall was one of them. Isolated by skin color, outnumbered in every classroom and on every cracked sidewalk. Every move, Coleman Homes, North Blodgett, and back again, meant starting over, but the feeling of being out of place never changed. School enrollment logs show his name bouncing from one address to the next, never staying long enough to blend in. The neighborhoods were marked by vacancy signs and broken windows. The 1980s saw Detroit's population drop by nearly 500,000, and the white flight left pockets of poverty behind. The city's own crime reports documented a violent crime rate more than double the national average in these blocks. For a kid like Marshall, the threat was not just background noise, it was daily reality. At age 9, that reality turned brutal. On a cold October day in 1983, police report number 83154 recorded a domestic disturbance at 609 West Sullivan Street. The details are blunt. a neighborhood teenager wielding a metal pipe left Marshall unconscious on the ground. Hospital records from Henry Ford put his Glasgow coma scale at 6, barely above deep coma. Doctors did not know if he would wake up the same. The attacker, just 14, walked free after a stint in juvenile diversion. For Marshall, the message was clear. Weakness invited violence. Being different meant being a target. The trailer parks offered no protection, and the adults were either absent or overwhelmed. He learned to keep his guard up, to expect betrayal, and to fight for every inch of safety. In a world where home changed every few months and danger waited outside every door, survival meant hardening fast. The scars, physical and invisible, would follow him into every battle still to come. High school in Detroit was never a fresh start for Marshall Mathers. Every September brought the same hallways, the same teachers, and the same warnings written in red ink. His academic record became a slow motion car crash. 3 straight years of repeating 9th grade, each transcript stamped with failure in English, chemistry, and physical education. The counselor's file from Oak Park High grew thick with notes: home instability, frequent absences, disruptive behavior. Teachers wrote bluntly about a student who drifted through class, distracted and angry, often asleep at his desk or missing for days at a time. Formal expulsion came not as a shock, but as a final, official closing of the door. The letter arrived in the spring, signed by the principal and filed in the school's permanent records with the statement, ineligible to return. No graduation, no diploma, no second chances. Marshall's name was removed from the roster, another dropout from a district already overwhelmed by lost kids. For a teenager already shut out at home and on the streets, the school's decision was just another reminder that the world had no place for him. The traditional path, college, career, stability, vanished overnight. Instead, the only option left was minimum wage work. The dream of becoming anything more than what he saw in the mirror each morning, poor, white, anonymous, felt impossibly far away. The school system had made its judgment. Marshall Mathers was alone. The smell of old grime, grease, and bleach clung to Marshall's clothes long after the shift ended. At Mickey's Diner on Canal Street, the dish pit was a world of cracked plates, steam, and the ache of standing for hours, all for $4.25 an hour, the minimum wage in Michigan in 1994. His hands were raw from scalding water and industrial soap, but there was no choice. School was over. The world had shut its doors. Rent still came due. And now there was a baby on the way. On December 25, 1995, hospital records in Wayne County logged the birth of Haley Jade Scott Mathers. The ink on the certificate was barely dry before the weight of responsibility settled in. Diapers, formula, and doctor bills stacked up against paychecks that vanished before the month was out. Childcare costs in Detroit hovered near $400 a month, almost a week's wages, gone before groceries hit the cart. Every dollar mattered. Studio time was a luxury measured in minutes, not hours. Nights blurred into mornings as Marshall juggled closing shifts and midnight feedings. He would scribble rhymes on order slips during breaks, his head pounding with exhaustion, but the music would not let him go. The grind was relentless. Still, every plate scrubbed, every double shift, every hour spent rocking his daughter to sleep became fuel for something bigger. The humiliation of scraping by, the rage at being boxed in by circumstance, the fear of failing Haley, these were the forces that drove him to chase a way out, no matter how impossible it seemed. The only BET left was on himself. The dream of rap stardom came wrapped in disappointment. In November 1996, Marshall Mathers scraped together enough money to press 2,000 copies of his debut album, Infinite. The cover was a grainy headshot, the sound a clear attempt to blend in with Detroit's underground scene. The hope was simple: prove he could rhyme with the city's best, maybe catch a break. But Infinite didn't break through. The album sold so poorly that unsold boxes stacked up in his mother's house. Local DJs barely spun it. Some critics dismissed him outright, calling his flow derivative, his voice too soft, his presence forgettable. The message was brutal. Nobody wanted to hear a white kid from the East Side rapping about struggle. Even in the battle circles where he'd earned a sliver of respect, Infinite was a punchline. The humiliation cut deep. Instead of opening doors, the album slammed them shut. The aftermath was more than just financial failure. Marshall spiraled. He started questioning his own worth, wondering if every insult about his race, his voice, or his background was true. The lyrics he'd written for Infinite tried to fit in, to please the gatekeepers, but the result felt hollow. Friends recall him growing more withdrawn, angrier, less willing to trust. He was working double shifts, exhausted, still broke, and now carrying the sting of public rejection. The weight of failure hung over him, threatening to crush what little hope he had left. But desperation breeds invention. In the depths of that self-doubt, Marshall found a new voice, a persona that didn't care about acceptance, didn't apologize for rage or pain. He called him Slim Shady. Shady was everything Marshall had been told not to be: vicious, sarcastic, reckless, and brutally honest. The lyrics spat venom at the world that had laughed at him. He rapped about violence, addiction, humiliation, and revenge, turning every insult into a weapon. The pain became performance. The anger became armor. Suddenly, the outsider status wasn't a weakness. It was a superpower. Slim Shady didn't beg for a seat at the table. He flipped it over. Infinite's failure wasn't the end. It was the moment of reinvention, when Marshall stopped chasing approval and started creating on his own terms. The city that had booed him now had to reckon with a new force, one that wouldn't back down, wouldn't blend in, and wouldn't let anyone else write his story. The next time he stepped into a battle, it wasn't Marshall Mathers they faced. It was Slim Shady, and he was done asking for permission. March 1997, Los Angeles. The Rap Olympics drew MCs from every corner of the country, each one hungry for respect. Marshall Mathers stepped onto that stage carrying more than just a rhyme book. He brought the weight of every closed door, every jeer, every night spent scrubbing dishes and wondering if the world would ever listen. The crowd was skeptical. Judges like DJ Premier and Cool K sat at the table, arms crossed, waiting to see if the white kid from Detroit could hold his own. He tore through 3 rounds, unleashing Slim Shady's venom, lines about humiliation, addiction, and revenge, delivered with a speed and ferocity that left the room stunned. When the dust settled, he stood in second place. Not the champion, but impossible to ignore. That night, an Interscope Records intern named Dean Geistlinger approached him backstage and asked for a copy of his demo. Marshall handed over the Slim Shady EP, barely more than a handful of songs recorded on borrowed time and borrowed money. The cassette traveled from Geistlinger's backpack straight to the desk of Jimmy Iovine at Interscope. Iovine listened, heard something raw and undeniable, and walked the tape down the hall to Dr. Dre's office. Dre pressed play, and within an hour, the phone rang in Detroit. The call came in at 4:05 p.m., documented in Interscope's artist acquisition log, a message for Eminem's manager. Dre wanted to meet the kid behind the tape, now. There was no FedEx label, no shipping delay, just a direct handoff that cut through the industry's usual red tape. The tape didn't sit on a shelf or get lost in a pile. The urgency was real. Dre's voice on the line was the first sign that the world outside Detroit's battle circuit was finally ready to listen. For Marshall, who had spent years being told he'd never belong, that call wasn't just about music. It was proof that defiance could break through, that the outsider could force open the gates. The relentless climb had reached a new altitude. The door to the mainstream was wide open, and Slim Shady was about to step through. The world had never seen a force quite like Slim Shady. The Slim Shady LP dropped in February 1999 and detonated on the charts, selling over 10 million copies worldwide. What began as a desperate act of self-invention, an alter ego born from rejection and rage, became a cultural earthquake. The album's lead single, My Name, is crashed through radio playlists and late-night TV, its biting humor and raw honesty impossible to ignore. Marshall Mathers, once written off as a failed dishwasher from Detroit, suddenly found himself at the center of the music industry's spotlight. Critics and fans alike scrambled to keep up. The Grammys came calling in 2000, handing Eminem Best Rap Album for the Slim Shady LP and Best Rap Solo Performance for My Name Is. The Marshall Mathers LP followed in 2000, shattering records with 1.76 million units sold in its first week in the US alone. The album's unfiltered fury and pain dominated headlines, sparking controversy and debate. The numbers spoke for themselves. Eminem was outselling legends and rewriting the rules for who could lead hip-hop. The accolades piled up. More Grammys, MTV Awards. Then, in 2003, a moment no one could have predicted arrived. A white rapper from Detroit holding an Oscar. Lose Yourself, the anthem from 8 Mile, won Best Original Song at the Academy Awards, making Eminem the first hip-hop artist to ever claim that prize. He did not even attend the ceremony, thinking he had no chance. The world was forced to accept what Detroit's battle circles once denied. The outsider had become the standard. Every humiliation, every door slammed in his face, now echoed in the roar of sold-out arenas and the weight of gold records. The climb from poverty and ridicule had reached a peak few dared to imagine. December 2007 in Detroit. Marshall Mathers lay unconscious in a hospital bed, his body shutting down under the weight of prescription pills, hydrocodone, Vicodin, diazepam. Doctors worked through the night to stabilize his breathing, fighting off organ failure and the threat of brain damage. For days, the outcome was uncertain. The man who had turned every insult and every rejection into fuel for greatness now faced a battle that could not be won with words. The overdose nearly ended everything. When he woke, the world had changed. The hospital discharge came with a warning: another slip could be fatal. Within a week, Marshall checked into Hazelden, a rehab center in Minnesota, beginning a 90-day program that stripped away every layer of denial. There were no arenas, no crowds, just therapy sessions, daily check-ins, and the relentless work of piecing a life back together. His manager filed legal documents in Wayne County, making continued treatment a condition for any future tour or contract. For the first time, survival meant surrendering control. Recovery was not fast or clean. Early attempts at music stumbled. The album Relapse, recorded mid-treatment, sold big but still circled old shadows. It was only with Recovery, released in June 2010, that Marshall found a new voice, one that did not hide from pain or pretend the past was gone. Tracks like Not Afraid and Going Through Changes, put the struggle front and center. The risk paid off. Recovery debuted at #1 on the Billboard 200, holding the spot for 7 weeks and selling over 1 million copies worldwide by year's end. The comeback was not just about charts or trophies. It was about reclaiming agency, proving that the outsider, the kid who was never supposed to belong, could survive even his own destruction. In the end, resilience did not mean erasing the scars. It meant owning them and building something stronger in their place. In a world eager to shut him out, Eminem turned rejection into fuel and rage into art. Today, his presence is a reminder: the outsider who refused to fold now defines a generation's voice. As the gatekeepers shift, his story still echoes for anyone told they don't belong. The path isn't given, it's carved. Drop your thoughts below and join the conversation.